Forged by the fires of our trials, refined by God's craftsmanship.
Hey everyone, Tyler here, and I am here to share with you the devotion I did this week. I did this for a few different groups, and I did it because this week was American Independence Day. And for those of you not from the United States, it should be shared that the United States is extremely patriotic, and Independence Day is a very big holiday. Lots of fireworks, lots of people celebrating. And I wanted to sort of do a devotion to cut through all the smoke that inevitably comes with all these fireworks. A lot of people know a lot about the American Revolution, but not very many people know about certain aspects. And that's what I really get into. But before I start, I do want to establish you can use this in any country. It's just there are parts that you might want to tweak, especially if your country has a king. Especially regarding this first slide. This first slide has the title, Free from Kings and Their Religious Persecution. So if you live in a country with a king, just change the title and you should be fine. But really to get into this, when you are telling this story, it's good to start from the first slide, which establishes the New World territory map. And when you are presenting this, it's important also to explain why the New World is in quotations, because there were people already living here when these explorers arrived. I do have slides that you don't really have to go over, but for example, I share that Christopher Columbus is the first famous explorer to arrive in 1492, and he was looking for Spain. He arrived in Central America. John Trabot is the guy who discovered the New World for England in 1497, and Jacques Cartier discovered the New World for France in 1534. Now, if you want to keep going through this line of communication, you can also establish that each of these regions, the French, Spanish, and British areas, were all handled in different ways. For example, Spain really aggressively pursued the region and had conquests and wars with the people living down there. France established a lot of trade with the people living within this region. But this specific devotion we're doing is focused mainly on the British colonies, because that is what later became the United States. And so we're continuing on. This is a great place to pick up, really start grabbing people's attention. You can ask your audience, does anyone know how far it is between the United States and Europe? Anybody? Sometimes people know, sometimes people have no idea. But North America is 4,178 miles from Europe, and that's about 1,000 miles more than the distance across the U.S. from California to New York. Just before you proceed, really get people to really consider this. That's a really long distance, especially long to go in a wooden ship that is propelled by the wind. Across an ocean that has a lot of storms, and not only going somewhere you've never been, but also going somewhere without cities or towns, going somewhere for you and your family to start from scratch, maybe to chop down a bunch of trees and build your own house. And that's a great seed to plant, because then you can ask this question. You can ask this discussion question, which basically asks, what are some reasons why so many people came to the New World? Now, if you ask this, you get a lot of answers. Like, a lot of people will answer. I've done this twice this week, all different answers. But out of the gate, freedom, new opportunity, escape persecution. Escape persecution, if you hear that, that's the one to grab onto. Escape persecution. How are they being persecuted? Hopefully, you'll have someone come to the conclusion within your group that there was a lot of religious persecution happening in the 1600s in England. And if you get to that realization together, you can talk about this guy, King Henry VIII. Now, King Henry VIII is he was really two different people. King Henry VIII was a really, really fascinating dude that was really loved at one point in his life, coming up into royalty and becoming king, and then he became one of the most hated people in the history of the world. But he's perhaps most famous for removing Catholicism as the Church of England and turning it into Protestantism. And no one knows. Well, for those of you guys who don't know why, he did it because he wanted to get a divorce from his wife, and the Catholic Church didn't let him do that because his wife was not bearing a son, and he really wanted a son, and so he got divorced, found a new lady, kept trying and trying and trying. Fast forward a bit, then he gets a head injury jousting. And then from his head injury, he became a completely different person. After his head injury jousting, he went crazy and then executed 8 of his wives. Not the greatest human being. And all of them for the same reason, because they couldn't bear him a son. He was having a lot of daughters. So fast forward to the next king, or rather, queen. Now, if you ask, I did this devotion twice this week, one to a group of ladies, one to a group of guys, and I asked them, anyone know the nickname of this queen? Queen Mary. And the ladies knew it right away. Bloody Mary. Now, Bloody Mary got the moniker Bloody Mary because she was very aggressive. She took out her anger against her father on the Protestants, and she made it an executable offense to practice any other denomination of Christianity other than Catholicism. And she very much aggressively punished those who were Protestant and tried to practice within the borders of England. And there were many other harsh laws that happened during her reign. So insanity and having harsh punishment seems to run in the family. So that happened, and that led to this, the pilgrimage to the New World. So all these people were escaping Bloody Mary, and thousands of people moved to the New World. I have to bridge this gap, so I'm just going to explain. Queen Elizabeth was the first. She was the sister of Bloody Mary. After Bloody Mary died in 1533, Queen Elizabeth took power. She actually, Queen Elizabeth, was Protestant like King Henry VIII, like her father, but she kept many of Bloody Mary's laws intact for a smooth transition to power. A lot of the clergy didn't want to change from Bloody Mary, from fear from the clergy around them. So for over 50 years, the people were stuck with this sort of religious persecution. So it took the son of Bloody Mary, King James the First, who is in power from 1603 to 1625. And he was famous for authoring the King James Bible. It's famous for being the first mass-produced Bible in history. And he did this to try to preserve order in the kingdom, try to rein in the church, and try to spread the word that England is chilled out and we're a safe place to live now. And from the King James Bible being mass spread, the Pilgrims now were able to have Bibles everywhere. The Pilgrims continued to establish townships and were continuing to grow in population. King James Bibles were distributed all over the world, including to the colonies. And between 1625 and 1775, what you saw in these townships were towns like the one in this picture you see on this slide. And at the center of these towns would be a church. And within this church, you would have priests reading from the King James Bible. So here's the last piece of information. Between 1625 and 1775, the population of the colonies grew from 2,000 people to over 2 million people. Yeah, so colonies were very healthy, growing very quickly, and things were going great until this guy shows up. King George III. King George was known as the Mad King George. And he wouldn't be the only king in history with the moniker of Mad King, but he is the only English king with the moniker Mad King, which is so odd to think because it's like he's the mad one, but King Henry isn't. So that's just evidence to how crazy King George III was. He was completely obsessed with power. His oppressive rule accelerated the colonists' desire for independence. He increased taxes on the colonists, and he wanted to disarm the colonists, and he wanted to religiously persecute the colonists. This led to the Continental Congress, which started to meet in the 1760s, and it was all the people of influence throughout the colonies who came from all different colonies to meet, and they started sending requests to King George to, back off and to allow the colonies to govern themselves. And really just, having no taxation without representation be a thing. But King George didn't budge and eventually began to threaten them with treason, which was an executable offense. So some of the people who were meeting at these Continental Congresses did back off. They did stop. They didn't want to get executed. But there were others, like the ones we now know of, like Benjamin Franklin, who didn't and stayed true to their beliefs. And they knew that this was a point of no return, and they drafted the Declaration of Independence. They knew they had to fight for the right of self-governance. But instead of going into the details of what is within the Declaration of Independence, to really simplify things, I just have direct quotes from a few of our founding fathers. This quote right here is a quote by George Washington. He said, "The United States of America should have a foundation free from the influence of clergy." This one quote right here is one that I like to share with people because there are so many Americans who think that the whole reason we fought in the American Revolution was to stop taxes. But then you have George Washington saying this quote right here, that we should have a foundation free from the influence of clergy. If you don't think that one is enough to establish a founding father's desire to have a country free from religious rule, here we have Thomas Jefferson, who said, "History, I believe, furnishes no example of a priest-ridden people maintaining a free civil government. This marks the lowest grade of ignorance of which their civil as well as religious leaders will always avail themselves for their own purposes." Now, I did do this twice this week, and one of the times I did this, I had someone raise their hand and be like, "Can you give that to me in like modern day English?" And here's my translation. He's basically saying throughout all of history, there have been no example of a people governed by religion where the people in power abused religion in order to preserve their own power. And it inevitably happens. And Jefferson, as he authored in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, strongly believed that government should be free from this level of influence. As I mentioned, there was a point of no return earlier, but for the founding fathers who were meeting the Continental Congress, this was the point of the no return for all of the colonists. This was the Boston Massacre. Now, in the Boston Massacre, you had a group of protesters, some of which threw rocks. A rock or two hit a British soldier. They decided to open fire on the crowd, and that led to 5 people being killed in the streets of Boston. This, again, marks the point of no return for the American Revolution, and the American Revolution was a go. So, throughout the history of the American Revolution, 70,000 Americans died. That's American colonists. 24,000 British troops died. And Britain vastly outnumbered and outgunned the American patriots. They just had to outlast the king's resources. And this is another thing you might want to talk about when you do this devotion. And in fact, if you have more time, you might want to pull some video clips that exemplify this, like from a movie like The Patriot or a show like Turn. British troops often resorted to brutal tactics and often attacked civilians. They would burn homes down, and they would torture people. The British troops got more and more and more brazen with how they would punish civilians, because they were just tired of being here, stuck in America, sleeping out in a tent, trying to preserve English rule. And they just got worse and worse and worse. But eventually, it came to the Battle of Yorktown, when the colonists took Yorktown. The British conditionally surrendered, which soon led to the end of the American Revolutionary War. The reason why I highlight Battle of Yorktown, because George Washington led the charge. He was named the first leader of the U.S., and he was offered to become king, but he refused. He thought if he became king, it would be hypocritical, because he would become what everyone, all the founding fathers around him, himself included, were fighting against. So he decided to reduce the power to that of a president. In fact, the United States is the first country with a president as its leader. And he also reduced the power of the presidency to terms. And thanks to Washington, it is now 8 years max, unless there's a wartime president. And you don't really want to go much further in this, in history. You don't really want to touch the Civil War, because that's a can of worms that will inevitably lead to more discussion. You want to really get to the biblical stuff. So after you get through the historical stuff in 1776 and the American Revolution, you just get to this slide here. The U.S. and their growing pains. The U.S. was the first country to gain independence from the British Empire, and per the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, there can be no law to oppress anyone's right to practice whatever religion they want. Now, here's the important thing to hang on, because this is a really sensitive topic for some people, and you want to do your best to really show that you recognize that. So when you are doing this devotion, you'll say just this last line here. You'll say, the U.S. has had a messy history and is still progressing, but the country we have today is thanks to the sacrifice of so many. And if you have a large group of people, you can also say, the country we have today is thanks to the sacrifice of so many, including many of which who have not been recorded in the books of history. Now, just make sure you really hang on that last part of that slide, because the United States does absolutely have a messy history, and that's just a reality. If you have people who are coming from all over the world to live within the United States, it's going to be messy. And I'm not even going to open up the Civil War can of worms here, but it is an important thing to discuss, and other devotions should be dedicated to that. But just to move on and get to the biblical stuff, we get to the next slide, which gets back to the discussion. And here we go. What does the Bible say about religious persecution? Well, that's right here. The reality is, Jesus says a lot. Jesus talked about it a lot. Now, the next slide, it directly quotes Jesus in Matthew 23:34. Matthew 23:34, where Jesus says, "Therefore, I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify, others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town." Jesus was saying that to Pharisees and Sadducees. Jesus was saying, I as God am going to send you teachers, and you're going to kill them, and you're going to torture them. And here's the kicker, and you're going to pursue them from town to town. Now, if we parallel this with what we just talked about through this entire devotion, what was going on back when Jesus walked the earth, of Christians who were following Christ being chased everywhere by the Roman Empire and the Pharisees, same sort of thing is happening with denominations of Christianity in the English Empire. People being chased all the way across the world, and then still to have to be, told by their king that they can't practice the way they practiced, even after hundreds of years of trying to survive in the wilderness, just so they can practice what they want to practice. It's pretty absurd. But you really want to get to the answers of how do you practice then? And the best passage you can go to is in John 7:38, where Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he says, "Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." He's, of course, talking about the Holy Spirit here. And my interpretation is, you just have to believe in Christ. To be a Christian, the key to Christianity is following Christ. Like religious persecution and the differences in the denominations and the amount of just arguing that happens between all the denominations, cut through that noise. The important thing is you pursue a relationship with Christ. And this closing slide I get to is what I call the assignment. And you can obviously have some discussion around, before getting to this assignment, around like how are people persecuted religiously nowadays. And the reality is people absolutely are all over the world, especially in the Middle East and in Africa. But we're going to talk about, you want to like have it focus on like how your audience is persecuted. And if you live in the United States, you might not be as persecuted as the people living here were 250 years ago. But there are different forms of persecution that everyone faces. Take, for example, social persecution. Some people lose friends because of them being open in their beliefs. And that in a way is persecution. So in closing, my assignment, I ask people when they pray to do the following. First, reflect on how those who have followed Christ have been persecuted historically and how they have remained faithful. And lastly, when they pray to God, develop that conviction in your heart. So when you pray to God, you develop that conviction in your heart to continue to follow Christ and how he leads you, regardless of whatever may be persecuting you today. So that being said, I want you to also, before you yourself present this devotion, try to do this exercise as well, because it'll help you get even deeper connected with Christ. And it's going to help anyone who hears this get deeper connected with Christ if they go through the same exercise of reflecting on religious persecution throughout history and how they can remain that faithful as those who traverse the world just to practice how they want to, or risk execution because they see Christ as leading them in that way. Anyways, that's this for my devotion. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you guys have any questions or ideas, you can email us on our website. And I hope you guys are having a good one.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching the Virilis podcast.
Yeah, now don't forget, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more content like this flowing your way, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button on our YouTube channel so you can be notified. Also, we are on Spotify and we have our own website. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating so that way we can get more people involved.
Yes, and if you want more exclusive content, go to our website in the description below. There we have our full unedited podcast devotions, and we also have blueprints. Yes. So what does that mean, Charlie?
So that means that we have blueprints where you can start a group of your own. If you feel compelled to do so, you can download the content and you can contact us with any questions that you would have about starting a group. But in the meantime, goodbye and Godspeed.